This happened to me a few years ago in downtown Toronto, Canada, when I was about 19 or 20 years old, living in an apartment far away from my parents for the first time. I lived on a side street that was slightly sketchy, but pretty much everything around there is sketchy, so I was always more alert. Just for reference, I'm a female and had 2 other female roommates. The apartment building that I lived in was an old 3-story building with 6 units, 2 on each floor. At the main outdoor entrance in front of the building, there is a porch with some chairs and a door in the middle that leads to a staircase that goes to the upstairs apartments as well as the basement. There was also a door on the left and right side of the main entrance, which leads directly to either main floor apartment. Of course, I lived on the main floor with a flimsy door that could be pushed open if it wasn't deadbolted. My shitty landlord refused to fix anything. Also, there was a basement in this building that was used for laundry, which was super creepy looking and decrepit. There were 2 doors down there, labeled as B01 and B02, as well as a separate washroom. I just assumed that they were shitty basement apartments, but I was pretty positive that they were not occupied. Sorry for the lengthy description, but you need to be able to picture the building to understand the story and realize how creepy this actually was. So it was probably around November. I remember it was cold. And we had been living in the apartment for a month or so without any issues. One day after class, I went grocery shopping and returned to my apartment when it just started to get dark, hands full of grocery bags. I get to my door and I see a woman just standing in front of my door, staring at the door, wearing a winter cap pulled down, slightly hiding her face. Side note, my roommates were not home at this point. Now, this woman was smaller than me and looked quite meek, so I wasn't feeling threatened. Just a little weirded out. Wanting to get this rude bitch out of my way, I say, excuse me? And she moves like 2 steps to the side, barely giving me room to get to my door, and also making her uncomfortably close to me when I was struggling with my keys to unlock the door. Afraid she was going to rush the door, I quickly slid in. A few minutes later, I heard a knock at the door. I assumed it was going to be this lady, so I was hesitant to answer, but did anyway. I opened the door just a crack, and the lady softly says, "Hi. Would you be able to let me in through this entrance? My friend lives in the basement and we were supposed to meet, but she doesn't have a phone." This immediately strikes me as strange given the earlier description of the basement. This was also the first time I really got a good look at her. She looked like she was in her mid to late 30s, with a sunken face and slightly unkempt. I told her that this door leads directly into my apartment, and it's the middle door that leads to the other apartments. Probably shouldn't have told her this detail, but it didn't really matter. She asked me again if she could just go through this way, and I told her no and closed the door. I think it was approximately an hour later when I heard one of my roommates coming home. She immediately headed to my room and told me there was a strange lady out front who was just sitting on one of the chairs in front of our door. I told her what happened, and we both agreed it was super creepy, and to make sure that the door was always deadbolted. We also decided to refer to her as the Mole Woman. Over the next couple of weeks, this lady would occasionally come to our building and just sit on a chair in front of our door with her head down, waiting. She would stay out there for hours, usually at night in the winter. Very odd. I don't think I can accurately describe the uneasiness that I felt every time I passed her, just due to the fact that she was always so close to my door that I basically had to squeeze around her to get in and out of my apartment. My one fear was that if she had a knife, she could easily just stab me one of these times as I walked past. One day she was there when I was leaving for class in the afternoon, and at this point, I was just walking past and not making eye contact whenever I saw her. This time though, one of the male neighbors from the apartment above me was also leaving and noticed the woman there. He started yelling at her to get the hell off our porch, saying that nobody here knows her and that she's freaking us all out, and he called the cops. This was the first time I had talked to any of the other occupants about the situation. He said that he has seen her standing in front of our door or sitting on the chairs on multiple occasions, and had told her to leave many times. She would comply at the time, and basically the next day she would be back on the porch. However, after the cops were called this time, we never saw her again. I still wonder about those basement apartments, and how she even knew that they were down there. I was mostly worried that she was actually telling the truth, and that there was a man living in the basement unit without a phone, which honestly makes it even creepier to me. In the end, I think she was just a mentally unstable person who was confused and maybe used to know someone living there. I've heard it was some sort of halfway house before my landlord bought the property and renovated. I attended college in a rural mountain area in the Northeast. A small school tucked away in the rolling hills of the mountains. The type of place where the beauty and casual grace of nature is juxtaposed by the ugliness of humanity. The newspaper was ultra-conservative, and you couldn't sojourn too deeply into the woods beyond a few trees without seeing some trace of meth activity. You know the type of place I mean. Anyway, one of my new friends from college discovered, somehow, an abandoned train trestle deep in the woods, about 5 miles from campus. In no man's land, basically. I don't remember how he found this place, because it was very much off the beaten path. The trestle crossed above a river, which placidly flowed about 40 feet below. It was actually quite beautiful, and we began going there maybe 3 times a week, just chilling on the trestle, watching the water below and the open sky above. We drink 40s there, smoke a bowl there, bring girls there. We began jumping off the trestle into the water below and then climbing back up. It was just a very college-y thing to do. Our chill spot, basically. So one day, just needing to get away from the dorms and away from it all, I decided to go by myself to the trestle for a swim. It was about 7 p.m., so I still had a good hour or so of dim sunlight, and I brought a flashlight for the walk home when it was sure to be dark. I made the trek through the pathways of the woods as I had done 100 times before. left my towel and flashlight on the trestle, and jumped into the water. The water was about 10 to 15 feet deep, I'd say. It flowed almost imperceptibly. You might as well be swimming in a stagnant pool. However, maybe about 50 yards away from the trestle, the river narrows and the current picks up significantly. Then about 20 yards after that, there is a maybe 20-foot high waterfall that bubbles and splashes with extreme violence. We used to watch large objects go over and never come up again. So there I am, dimly bobbing my head in and out of the water, doing underwater flips, etc. When I pop my head out of the water, I begin to glance to the other side of the river and see a man walking towards the water. The water is kind of impeding my view, so I don't see him fluidly walking towards the water. I more see him in different stages of being closer to the water. Like flipping through a flip book. He's 15 feet away, 10 feet away, 5 feet away. I can barely give you a description, maybe 6 feet tall, pale, skinny, black hair, pulled back in a ponytail. What I do remember most about his appearance was the extremely empty look on his face and in his eyes. Like he was doing something mundane. Taking out the trash or raking leaves. I'm treading water, not knowing what to think, and I see that he is no longer beside the river. He has dove in, and is swimming pin straight directly at me, so fast. So fast. I try to swim the opposite way, but within a minute, I feel him grab my ankle and tug. I tried to scream, but water filled my mouth. While I'm underwater, he lets go and goes up for air, then grabs back on and pulls me again. It seems like he's done this before, and I never once see him after he jumped in the water. He's gradually pulling me to where the current picks up before the waterfall. I start to realize this and just fucking flipping out. Kicking, screaming, cursing to no effect. Finally, I feel the current start to take me. And as I twist away towards the waterfall, I look back and see this fucking guy just casually swimming back to where he jumped in the water. Not even looking at me. This is by far the scariest moment of my life as I approach the waterfall. Long story short, I go over, and I'm underwater for a long time, over a minute. The water above unrelentingly pushing me under. The only reason I survived was there was a large log that had gone over, and I grabbed it and leveraged it against the bottom to push me away from the crushing water. I survived, obviously. But then I had to trek the miles back to my dorm in the dark without my flashlight. Every step of the way thinking he would come back to finish the job. The next year, a football player drowned going over that fall. The news said it was because there was an extreme current due to recent rainfall, but I've always wondered about that. Warning, this post is long, so please get your popcorn. Backstory. Feel free to skip. I live in a big city in Australia, and at the end of my time in university, I was desperate for money and just out of an extremely abusive relationship. Now I am pretty impulsive and decided to start dancing, as I'd actually been thinking about it since I was 14, to get myself through university. It took me a while to find a club I liked the look of, but finally settled on one. I made a ton of friends, a fuck ton of money, and still had time to get good grades. As far as I was concerned, life was great. Nothing creepy ever happened at the first club I was at. Anyway, one day I get toxic shock syndrome and show up to work crying and throwing up, and I was still forced to work. I was so pissed off that I left that club and started dancing at a club that one of my friends worked in. We'll call her Jess. And this is where things started getting sketch. Note, all stories come from the second club. Story 1. Followed by a gang. Me and Jess would always hang out after work. Me 19, her 18. We'd go walk across the huge bridge in the city to a smaller part of the city and either play on the kids' playground, epic playground though, or smoke weed under the bridge. Keep in mind, this is about 3 a.m. in a huge city. One night, I noticed we were being followed by a group of men of Middle Eastern descent. Me and my friend are both very confrontational and aggressive. We both enjoy fighting. I'm probably the more paranoid, but we are both equally aggressive. So I turn around and give them the most chilling death stare I can manage, and they look genuinely surprised that we're putting up a fight. Then one of the group comes up to us, and up until this point, they had been talking in Urdu, I think. Me. Fuck do you want? All the while holding intense eye contact, him. Me and my friends have made a bet that I can get a kiss from one of you. He was using those tones you commonly hear in the pickup artist community. Me. Stop watching shitty pickup videos, they don't work. I'm not talking to you. He turns toward my friend Jess, who gives him a belittling stare. Can I have a kiss from you? Jess. No, you rude-ass son of a bitch, you. A gang of men, guys, were following us. Fuck off. We're both getting equally agitated at this moment as the group is getting closer. The guy keeps on insisting that we're not following us and rattling on about random shit, trying to distract. Jess notices it too, and we both start getting louder and louder, causing a commotion, which causes the men to stop advancing. If you've ever been alone in this particular city at 3 a.m., it's quiet. There's lots of homeless people and a fair few cops around too, so this tactic aimed to provide witnesses in case anything happened. Eventually they left, and me and Jess laughed at how scared we made them. Story 2. Scariest one in my opinion. Note that in stripper culture we all take care of each other. One girl in the club, we'll call her Maddie, had gotten one of her guy friends to come into the club and chill for a bit. Note that this is actually illegal, we'll call the guy Dave. Maddie is married with 2 kids and is wealthy as she owns property. When I asked her why she dances, she said for fun. And granted, it is pretty fun. Immediately, I don't like the guy, but Maddie said he wanted to buy a dance from me. I didn't end up dancing for him because I ended up booking a 2-hour VIP lap dance, so Maddie took him for a dance instead. Anyway, after work, me and Maddie go to the 7-Eleven, where we get coffee and sober up a little. Maddie says she is feeling a little dizzy, and she hadn't drank much that night. This immediately sets off alarm bells because I'm paranoid. But then alarm bells really started going off when we witnessed some men out on the town for a night of fun, just minding their own business, being assaulted by a homeless woman. Normally Maddie would laugh at this kind of thing as it was pretty common. Plus the homeless lady had assaulted me and Jess previously. Story 3. But Maddie just looked at them sunken-eyed and asked if everything was okay. Maddie isn't wearing clothes that are warm enough, so I walk her across the bridge and we settle down in a well-lit hidden spot of mine that is warm and very well hidden from view. I always go to this spot after work as it's the warmest place. I test her motor skills and determine that she's been drugged, as she is becoming more out of it by the second. I message her husband, who is not in Australia and on military training exercise. I informed him of the situation and promised to take care of her. At this point, I want to call an ambulance, but Maddie is determined to stay put. She gives me her phone and tells me to answer any messages that come through. Sure enough, the first message I see is on Snapchat from Dave. I should have fucking known. Where are you? You're not bailing on me, are you? Winky face. I know for a fact that Maggie would not cheat on her husband, as they were somewhat of a super couple. So I reply, haha, what do you mean? I can see that you're in insert suburb here. You want me to pick you up? I look over at Maddie and by now she is sleeping. I check her every few minutes to make sure she is okay. I look down at the text. How do you know where I am? I just saw you and Athena, my stripper name, walking that way. Are you near insert building name here? I'll be there soon, don't worry. Did that motherfucker follow us? Maddie chose that moment to wake up and projectile vomit all over the floor. My head. There were voices from each side telling me what to do. Grab Maddie and run. Use the knife you have and scare the shit out of this fucker. Call O. Hide. No. My first concern should be the safety of Maddie, a mum, and my own safety second, not a mum. I try to convince Maddie that we need to go to the police, but she chooses that moment to tell me that she can't because she is dealing. Oh well, I thought. I prefer handling things my way anyway, but still, way to fucking tell me. So we're basically cornered in a large outside restaurant underneath a theater, and I can hear footsteps coming closer. I'm in no position to defend both me and Maddie at the same time. I drag Maddie up the stairs and through the outside part of the theater. It's a fucking maze in this complex. So I am dragging Maddie, who is barely conscious at this point, through the theater maze until we get out to the other side. I demand that Maddie hand me any drugs she has, as I'm going to dump them and call an ambulance. She's barely cognitive, so I search her and turn up nothing. Then I call an ambulance, and long story short, the guy Dave was up for several charges of sexual assault on sex workers. Maddie has since denied any part in dealing and doesn't remember pretty much anything. I, however, cut contact with her as I believe that she was dealing. Not that strippers don't deal, but it's generally a code of honor to tell the other girls, for one, we won't rat on you, and for two, we know who has extra baggage and where to get weed. Story 3. Assaulted by a homeless woman. Or at least attempted. Strippers can spot other strippers instantly out of a crowd. If you are on the sweetie list, every stripper in the vicinity knows who you are and is extra nice to you. So I don't know the name of the homeless woman, but me and Jess went to the 7-Eleven for coffee and talked to the owner a little bit. The owner, a Sikh that we'll call Ra, is on the sweetie list and gives all the strippers free tampons as he doesn't believe a woman should have to pay for them. And also routinely warns us about new sketchy characters in the area. I was talking and laughing with Ra as he was working security that night as Jess got our coffee. When she comes out, Ra warns us about a homeless woman that's been harassing people. I won't include her description. I think Ra and me and Jess head off to begin our nightly shenanigans. Metal detecting for valuables on the man-made beach, smoking weed, exploring, scaring tourists, etc. I tell Jess that I really need to poop, so we head over to the public bathroom and who fucking knew? The homeless woman is in the woman's bathroom. She looks at us once, screams, "You Australian dogs!" Bitch, hello? You're white? Then backs up a few paces and no joke, although I was laughing my ass off, and gets a syringe and injects herself with it. I still really need to poop, so I start heading to the men's stalls, Jess following and laughing behind me. I try to poop, but anyone with a history in biology will know your anal sphincter closes up if you've had a fright. So I tell Jess in the next stall that I can't poop, so we start walking out. The woman runs up and pulls both our hair. I suppose she was done doing heroin? And was screaming in gibberish. She's short, skinny, and no match for us, so we push her off and laugh hysterically. We leave and bitch about her for the rest of the night. However, this isn't the last time that we encounter her. A few days later it's about 10 or 11, so there are still a few people around. I see this woman looking at herself in a store reflection. She is making the facial expression of someone that is screaming, but she's making no sounds, just staring, feigned screaming. She sees me walking by and immediately comes over to me asking for money. I accuse her of assaulting me, and she spits on me and tells me I was hallucinating. Okay, whatever. I wouldn't beat up a homeless woman. I saw her several times after this and even asked Ra about it again, who said that he's had to call the cops on her multiple times for assaulting people. Story 4. Annoying American tourists. The stripper gods are a popular part of stripper culture. Let me start by saying that if you are an American male, you are in demand. Australian women love American men, and that goes for strippers too. Because you've grown up in a tipping culture and a culture in which stripping is more acceptable, you will be very popular with the ladies, stripper or not. Same goes for American women strippers. Love y'all. To preface this story, not to brag, but in that club I was the best damn dancer there. My pole flexibility and floor skills are insane. I could usually book at least one dance with my stage skills. I don't know what happened this night. The stripper gods in heaven blessed me for some reason. But everyone, and I mean everyone that night, wanted me. As soon as I got off stage, I was approached by at least 5 guys for a dance who were fighting over me. Nina, a lovely Russian and an older stripper, who was a veteran stripper of 18 years, told me to pick the American as it was nearly closing time and I wouldn't be able to dance for all of them. One rule in that club: if Nina tells you to do something, you do it. Not even management stood up to her. So I take her advice and escort the American to the lap room. In Australia, at least in my state, you are allowed to touch everywhere on the stripper except in the G-string area, and no mouth-to-skin contact. Anything else is considered prostitution. So this guy is touching me and everything seems normal. I grinding around on his lap, trying to see the reflection of the TV in the mirror. I go through all my usual moves: grind on right leg, left leg, floor routine, bend over, spread eagle, keep in time with the music, when he randomly says, "I wish I could cut off your breasts and take them home with me," without a hint of sarcasm or humor. I brush this off as this is only mild compared to the things you usually hear. He then starts rattling off about how he hates his girlfriend, that I'd make a much better girlfriend and he'd take me back to America with him, and I'd never have to work again. I ignore it, bored, and soon the lap dance ends. So after we come out of the lap room, the club is dead. He starts trying to get me to leave with him. I can't remember most of the conversation, but I remember he was pulling some really emotional bullshit. I remember specific things. "I can't even have coffee with you? Do you pull this bullshit on everyone? I was nice to you. I bought a dance. I'm going to wait for you outside." I was tired and pretty drunk, so I paid literally no attention, as I've dealt with this many times and know how to handle it. I told my manager about him waiting outside and called the police to escort him on. I do my usual routine: walk around the corner to the Pie Face, then go to 7-Eleven for coffee and a chat with Ra. So I'm talking to Ra when he asks me if I know that guy outside. Sure enough, it's Desperado watching me. I quickly explain to Ra, and he calls the cops, who give me a ride home. It was the first week of summer, and 2 friends and I had decided to go to Florence for a day. At about 2 p.m., we decided to split up. They wanted to go to the Galleria degli Uffizi, but I had already been there only a few months prior. So we set a meeting point and time, and while they went to the museum, I decided to search for the Basilica of San Miniato al Monte. The church is on top of a very steep hill, and thanks to my awesome orienteering skills, I got lost almost immediately. So I asked a random guy for directions. He is the creeper in this story, and will henceforth be referred to as Orgy Man. Orgy Man was in his late 40s, really skinny and scrawny, awful facial hair, and a strong Tuscanian accent. He claimed that he was going to the church too, and we went the rest of the way together. At first, we made normal small talk, but once we got in front of the basilica, things got really weird. Before I go any further, there are a few things that you should know about me. I've always been incredibly shy, awkward, and unattractive. I'm simply not used to receiving male attention, and the few times that it happens, I'm completely stumped and don't really know how to react. That's why I didn't walk away when things got creepy. I know it's stupid, but when I find myself in this kind of situation, I simply have no idea what to do and just go with the flow. We were in a pretty crowded tourist area, so I don't think I was ever in any danger. I don't really remember the exact development of our conversation, so here are a few gems in non-chronological order. He said that he spent 7 years traveling through Asia to study Eastern religions. On a beach in Thailand, he saw the Virgin Mary in the clouds, smiling at him. A bit weird, but lots of people in Italy are hardcore Catholics. He also said that he had the power to read minds. Sure did. A lot of his ideas about the Roman Empire were bad history worthy. For example, he blamed foreign slaves for the fall of the empire. He knew all of Dante's Inferno by heart, seriously. Even the Canto 33, my favorite. I don't care how much of a creep he turned out to be later. That's awesome. Eventually, Orgy Man started comparing me to a Roman goddess. I felt flattered and uncomfortable at the same time. The real craziness started when he mentioned his activity as an amateur historian. He claimed to have read the manuscript of some mystic saint from the Middle Ages, where she described certain practices that apparently took place in a lot of monasteries. Nuns and monks would meet at night and, yes, have orgies. This tied in with his Eastern studies, as Orgy Man claimed that divine orgies were a way to talk to God. In other cultures too. Homosexual relationships don't count because sex with someone of your same gender is like masturbation, in that it doesn't release any cosmic energy. Direct quote. Fun fact, in Dante's times, homosexual relationships and, sadly, male-on-male pedophilia were such a common crime in Florence that foreigners refer to it as the Florentine vice. But a divine orgy doesn't have anything to do with what you kids do at the club every Saturday night. But a divine orgy is a sacred ritual with certain rules that he detailed, but I don't remember because I was still trying to process the fact that he thought this was an even remotely appropriate topic to discuss with an underage girl he just met. When we eventually visited the church together, he pointed to the crypt and said, "Priests and nuns probably met down there to have orgies." A true man of culture. After those interesting tidbits, Orgy Man sadly reverted to an ordinary creeper. He started begging for my phone number, which I obviously didn't give him, and said that he wanted to take me to his study to show me all his ancient documents. When I said that I wasn't interested in becoming his disciple, he replied with, "I bet I can make you fall in love with me." No thanks. After I made it clear that I was there with some friends who would be very worried if I didn't show up to our meeting point, he finally left me alone. We separated amicably, and I admit that he said some very interesting, although batshit crazy, things. Anyway, weird humanist creeper obsessed with medieval sexuality. Let's never meet again. In the 7 years I have spent working at a tanning salon, I have had quite a few creepy encounters. In the area I live in, it is well known that most salons are staffed with young women that typically work alone. I work at a rather large chain, and our owner does a great job of taking all possible measures to keep us safe. Police regularly patrol our parking lots, and each salon is equipped with cameras as well as panic buttons. Even with these precautions, you are bound to have some sketchy situations. This is one that still gives me the heebie-jeebies. This situation occurred about 2 years ago. I was a regional manager at the time and was in charge of 5 of our salons. It was a sunny Friday day during our slow season. I was working at one location when I received a call from Kim, an employee that was working at another location. Side note on Kim. To put it bluntly, she was a big pain in my ass. She loved to challenge me on every decision I made, just went out of her way to make my life difficult. To her credit, she worked for the company for years, and had just recently graduated college. She was over it, and ready to get on to a different career path. That being said, Kim doesn't call me just to chat. It was very common for the girls to call me with questions and whatnot, Kim included. I was thrown off though when I answered the phone to, "Hey Rachel, please pretend to be on the phone with me," in a whisper. I reply, "What's going on? Do I need to call someone?" Ignoring my question, she goes on to chat about the weather, what she is up to later, and other nonsense things. As I said earlier, we encounter our fair share of odd characters working alone, and have all used a phone call to look unavailable. This usually works to get a customer on their way when they have overstayed their welcome. For some reason, though this call felt different, Kim's voice was shaking. I knew something was wrong. At this point, Kim steps outside of the store and tells me what was happening. For more of a visual, I'll explain the layout of the store. This particular store has 2 front doors that lead you into the large open lobby and to the front desk. Behind the desk, there is a wall and 2 hallways on either side. These walls do not run fully up to the ceiling, so the hallways feel more open. The left hallway has a right turn to an open vanity area that meets the right hallway. The right hallway continues down to the back of the store, where the back door and the restroom are located. It then makes a sharp left turn and ends with more tanning rooms. So once you walk down that right hallway, you have to come back that same way until you reach the vanity area. Sorry if this was confusing. The layout is a bit complicated. Back to Kim. She is now outside in the front of the store. Oh my god, Rachel, I'm freaking out. She fills me in on what just occurred. A young man came in to tan about an hour before. He was late 20s and very normal looking, acting. He had tanned a few times before, but it had been a while. Nothing out of the ordinary. He pays and heads to a room located in the back of the store. Fast forward 45 minutes. Kim is walking down the hall to refill her water bottle in the restroom. She pushes open the door, and the man is standing there facing her in the pitch-black bathroom. She does what any human would do, screams, "What the fuck, you scared the shit out of me!" She said the man mumbled he was sorry and was on his way out. Kim books it to the front desk. That's when she called me. She says she was originally embarrassed for walking in on a customer and about her reaction, so she wanted to look busy as he exited the store. Kim and I had been on the phone chatting for 10 to 15 minutes at this point, and the man had yet to come up from the back. We have bells that ring whenever someone enters or exits a salon, and Kim was positive that she had not heard the bells go off after the restroom incident. I tell her to call the police and have them check it out. She begins to second guess herself as she was cleaning, trying to look busy, so he could have slipped out. But her gut continued to tell her something wasn't right. Majority of our salons are located in strip malls. This was no different, with the location Kim was currently at. We happen to have a Subway directly next to our store, and over the years we have become very close with the guys that work there. Kim and I decided that if she was not going to call the police at this point, then she should have Mike from Subway come over and check out the store. Make sure the guy was gone. I know it sounds silly to some of you, but the amount of weird shit we deal with. We try to cover our bases before calling the police for every little thing. Mike comes over, makes his way throughout the store and finds nothing. He spent a good 20 minutes checking every room, as Kim was visibly shaken up. Mike heads back to Subway, telling Kim not to hesitate to call if she needed anything else. Kim calls again a few minutes after Mike leaves. She is practically crying at this point. "Rachel, I know he is still here, I just know it. I'm so scared." We decide Kim needs to call the police, if for nothing other than her own peace of mind. The officers arrive shortly. Kim explains the situation, and they begin to search the salon. I am no longer on the phone with Kim, so the rest of the story she filled me in on after the fact. The officers find nothing, and tell her the man probably left while she was over at Subway. Kim insists they search the store one last time. They are a bit annoyed, but agree to look one more time to appease her. They sweep the store, and they're on their way back up when Kim hears one of the officers yell, "Hey you! What the hell you think you're doing?" Moments later, the officers are walking up the hallway with the man in handcuffs. The man had been hiding in the store, switching from room to room as they were searched by Mike as well as the officers. Our salons have massage beds, and they are on wheels. The man pulled out a bed and hid underneath it. His feet stuck out though, so he ran into one of the tanning rooms when the officers went to search the massage room. Because the walls did not reach the ceiling, the man was able to hear where the officers were within the store, and moved around without them seeing him. The only reason he was caught was because the officer decided to glance back down the hall after checking the rooms. He was perpendicular with the door of a room, and could see two eyes peeking out of the crease of the door jamb. The man was hiding behind the door, trying to be as still as possible. When asked why he was hiding in our store for 3+ hours, fully aware that the young lady working was terrified, his response was, "My girlfriend and I just broke up. I'm having a rough day." The cops were unable to arrest the man. They told him he would be arrested if he were to return to the premises. Then they came into the store to warn Kim that it would be in our best interest to get a restraining order against him, so he would not be allowed in any of our stores in the future. They believed he was hiding behind the door, waiting for a girl to come in and do who knows what to her. Though they were pretty certain he had malicious intent. Our owner followed the advice of the police. The man is not allowed anywhere near our salons, and we have never seen him since. Moral of the story? Trust your gut. I grew up in Romania and was about 11 to 12 when this happened. I want to say it's when I was older, so that it would make this more believable. But I left Romania permanently before year 7 started, and this incident happened around the time I left, that I was in the year 7, year 8. Back then, Yahoo Messenger was really big with kids in Romania, and people from all over the country would roleplay on forums and make friends. So we'd add each other on Messenger to get to know each other better. Please don't think my parents have never warned me against talking to strangers, because they have, time and time again. But I was a kid who made friends very easily online, and nobody was really that scared in terms of potential kidnappers or pedophiles, because those sort of crimes had very low rates at the time in my home country. I was smart when it came to this. I knew I could still be friends with people while being able to tell the difference between a decent person and a potential pedophile. Also, my parents didn't actually know about my role-playing until much later, and then they were a tad concerned. But I digress. I made a friend who was a few years older than me. I think she must have been 14 or 15 at the time, and all of her Messenger lot had nicknamed her Snail. I forget why. So Snail and I used to be really close and talk all day, every day. I was just chilling on my forums one day, leaving my Messenger open and online, when she popped up and started to talk to me about this guy she met. We knew that he was much older than us. I forget how old, but if I had to look back on it now and guess, maybe about 30 or 40. Although I'm sure he told us he was much younger than what he actually was. So she was talking to me about him and gave details of their conversation. I don't think she was creeped out at first, but she really didn't know what to say to him either. So I decided I wanted to be involved. She gave me his ID and I added him, and we got chatting. Snail and I had detailed a very elaborate fake life for him. To this day, I'm very glad that online safety and stranger danger has been drilled into me from a young age, because if it hadn't, then I don't know if we would have even come up with this lie. We said we were twins, 17 years old, and we grew up in Romania, but lived in Italy at the moment. Obviously, we didn't feed this information to him all at the same time. We just had to add more and more to the lie whenever he asked us questions that we couldn't answer in any other way. It started off pretty harmless. He wanted to know our names, how old we are, why we moved to Italy. I genuinely can't remember what we said to him about this, but I could tell he was more interested in my friend than me. She was busy and couldn't always reply, so he would send me messages asking what she was doing and why she was so slow. Were we even sisters? Surely if one's online right now, then so is the other. I always lied, said she had to run an errand or just got distracted. I would then privately message Snail and tell her what I'd said, so that if he asked, she would know what to say. He kept asking if she was in the same room as me, and I kept saying yes, but I didn't know why he was insisting on it. He also kept asking me to talk to her on my ID. Looking back now, I really hope he hadn't hacked into my webcam or something. I just told her the messages I was being sent, and she wrote back replies, and I copy and pasted them into the chat so that he thought it was her. I urged her to stay online and talk to him. Well, I spoke to him too, and she did. Alarm bells rang at times during this conversation, namely when he kept insisting that she wasn't in the same room as me, but not fully until he asked to meet up. Now, this guy is meant to have lived in Romania at the time, not Italy, where we lived. So me and Snail were really confused. Not scared, but just confused. And I messaged back, reminding him that we lived in Italy, so we can't meet up. He didn't let it go. He just kept saying we should meet up, and that he was willing to meet us for coffee in a cafe in Italy. What were we supposed to say? Snail found it all hilarious, but I was finally starting to be a little uncomfortable. Why was he insisting on getting a plane ticket to Italy to meet us? Snail was ready to agree, whether as a joke or because she started to actually like him a little. I don't know. Obviously, she would have absolutely no way of getting to Italy, but she seemed pretty comfortable with agreeing that he should come over. I really wanted the conversation to be over, despite having originally pretty much begged to be involved. I think the last straw was when he asked to see us on Skype. I wanted to nope the fuck out, but Snail didn't. She simply said we didn't own a webcam, and there was no way we could do it. He kept harassing her to do it, to Skype him. Although she just kept repeating that she didn't have a webcam, so she couldn't. I put a stop to the game then and there. I told him we'd essentially catfished him. He was angry at us for lying about our identities, and then said that, keeping in mind I was 11 or 12, and Snail was 14 or 15, he still wouldn't mind meeting with us. Blocked. It was fun, but I was still uneasy, given all the different things we said that he insisted weren't true. I mean, sure, he could have just guessed or tried to make us slip up, but why insist? Sometimes I think about this and wonder if there was more to it, and if he actually did hack into our webcams, or had another way of seeing what we were doing, despite Snail and I being in different countries. So, creepy messenger pedophile, let's not meet. It is, literally, my favorite place in the world. It's on a small, very secluded lake, shared by only a few other cabins, one other cabin by my side, 6 in total. Most of my neighbors only visit during spring-fall months, and even then it's pretty rare to run into one of them. We all pretty much leave each other to do our own thing, but we also try to look out for each other the best we can. We will occasionally check in on each other's property during off-season visits, just to be sure there haven't been any damages from storms or any break-ins, etc. We all try to be good neighbors, because the lake is a pretty popular fishing location in the area as a result of it being so secluded. It's not unusual to see people who don't live on the lake out in a boat or hiking around with a fishing pole. In the winter, it becomes a popular place for ice fishing and snowmobiling. So again, it kind of reinforces why all of us who own property on the lake try to look out for one another, as there are people coming and going at all times of the year. There have been a few break-ins on the lake over the years, but honestly, in the 30-plus years I've been going up to the cabin, there have only been a handful. Occasionally, someone's canoe or kayak will go missing, but that's pretty much the worst of it. Until this winter. My wife and I decided to take a week-long vacation at the cabin this winter. She was getting ready to start a new job, and I had leftover PTO from the previous year. So, we figured we should take the opportunity to get away before our schedule started to get busy again in the spring. It was sort of impromptu. But once we got the idea of spending a week alone together, relaxing by a wood stove, drinking craft beer, winter hiking, and binge-watching DVDs, we couldn't get it out of our heads. 2 weeks later, we were packed up in my father's F-150. We swapped cars, and on the road. Things got wacky immediately. But first, there are a couple of things you need to know about this location. The lake basically sits in the middle of a dead zone as far as wireless reception goes. Sometimes, you can randomly get a couple bars of service, but never with regularity. The isolation and feeling of being unplugged is one of the main reasons I love going up to the cabin. It becomes a lot easier to not glue yourself to your phone when you physically can't. Secondly, as mentioned before, the place is secluded. It's a solid 10-minute drive before cell reception kicks in with any sort of consistency, and about another 5 before you reach town. A couple of years ago, and after much debate within the family, we decided to break down and get a satellite dish installed so we could have some connection with the outside world. We essentially have basic cable for news, weather, and a phone line. However, my folks have the service suspended at the start of winter, since our family rarely visits during those months. So my wife and I were heading up without a phone connection. But it had never been a problem before, so we didn't really think anything of it. It hadn't snowed too much in our area, but the ground was still covered in a few inches of old snow, and there were snowmobile tracks all over the place. Before reaching the final turn off towards the cabin, you have to drive across a causeway, fancy term for a land bridge, and while crossing it, you get a really good view of both sides of the lake. It had been cold for a few weeks straight, so the lake was frozen over. I looked out over the lake and saw what appeared to be 2 guys ice fishing, sitting on a picnic table out in the middle of our side of the lake. It was my neighbor's picnic table. I knew right away that it was his because of its very distinct paint job. This exact thing had actually happened before, and the last group of fishermen that did this left his table out on the ice, and it fell through once the lake started to thaw. Because of this, my neighbor had chained his new picnic table to a concrete footing on the edge of his property. So that means these guys either broke the table to get it out on the lake, or they broke the chain. I'm also pretty confident that it wasn't my neighbor out on the ice because he lives in Florida, doesn't fish, and never visits in the winter. This pissed me off. I say something along the lines of, "Again? The fuck is their problem?" to my wife, and she reciprocated in a similar fashion. Since both of us were in agreement, I sped up to get to the cabin and confront them before they could run off. I didn't really have a plan, but I figured I would go yell at them and threaten to call the cops if they didn't put it back, which I couldn't actually do. I kind of figured that as soon as they saw the truck turn down the road, they would take off anyway. I was right, but oddly more right than I knew. As I came down the road, I noticed a few things that struck me as odd. First, there were two dudes jumping onto and starting up snowmobiles that were parked in front of my neighbor's cabin. Second, the front door to the cabin was wide open, lights were on, and there was smoke coming out of the chimney. I stopped the truck about 50 feet from his driveway and watched as the two guys drove the snowmobiles out onto the lake, picked up their buddies and sped off across the lake and into the woods. We kind of just sat there for a minute or two, dumbfounded. I wasn't really sure what was going on, but it definitely didn't feel right. I guess it was technically possible that my neighbor was visiting, or that maybe he rented his cabin out to some people. But my gut told me that wasn't the case. There were no cars on his driveway, and the guys on the snowmobiles were definitely in some sort of hurry when we pulled up. Also, it was like 10 degrees outside, so why would they leave the door open? After snapping out of it, I parked the truck in front of our cabin and walked over to the edge of the lake. Sound travels pretty well out there, and I could hear the snowmobiles getting farther and farther away. I unlocked our cabin, threw a quick start log into the wood stove, and then my wife and I headed over to my neighbor's cabin with our dog. I called out, "Hello?" a few times, and then I tried, "The Scrumpster's neighbor, are you there?" and got nothing back. As we got closer, I could see that the front door was splintered and had been pried open. My wife and I had unknowingly pulled up while people were actively breaking into my neighbor's cabin. Not exactly an ideal way to start a relaxing winter getaway. My family is on really good terms with my neighbors, so I went ahead and stepped inside to check it out. There was a fresh pile of wood by the stove, which was roaring, and the kitchen had some paper plates, food, empty beer cans, and cigarette butts strewn about. Nothing seemed broken or missing that I could tell, but the place was an absolute mess and reeked of cigarettes. It was as if they had just decided to help themselves and make my neighbor's cabin their own private fishing lodge for a while. There were some sleeping bags and a cooler in the living room, so it looked like they had been planning to stay for more than a day. I wasn't in the cabin for more than a minute or so, and I was careful not to touch anything. I did, however, snap a few pictures for my neighbor, the cops, and then I snuffed out the wood stove. I also decided to close the front door the best I could when I left, while wearing gloves, since we were going to have to leave in order to get in touch with the police and my neighbor. And I didn't want the front door left wide open. The next couple of hours were pretty bunk. We drove into town and reported the break-in to the police. After giving our report, we got in touch with my neighbor, who was understandably very upset. I did my best to assure him that things weren't too bad, all things considered, and that there would just be some cleaning up to do, I offered to do it since we were going to be up there all week. But he insisted that he wanted to see it all for himself. He was going to make plans to fly up from Florida to deal with everything as soon as he could, but asked if I could nail a couple boards across the broken door for now. The police were heading out to check out the property. Blah, blah, yuck. When we got back to our cabin, the police were already at my neighbors checking things out. One of them came over and asked if I could walk them through everything that happened. I retold the story and ended it with something along the lines of, "So I left, after shutting down the stove and closed the door behind me." I got some weird looks, and then conversation went something like this. "You're sure you closed the door because it was open when we got here?" "Yes, I definitely closed the door." "Well, it was open. And the items you described aren't there either. The sleeping bags, the cooler. They aren't there. So it looks like they came back and got them." That was pretty unnerving for some reason. Why risk coming all the way back for more sleeping bags and a cooler after getting away? They couldn't have known for certain that we weren't able to call the police right away. So the cops suspected that they were watching us and came back right after we left. Or that there was someone else in the area we didn't see. I listened to the snowmobiles driving off, and they got pretty far away. They kept going until I couldn't hear them anymore. And the woods on the other side of the lake is completely untouched wilderness for miles. I know because I hunt turkey out there. So I personally think there was someone else close by watching us. My wife really liked that little bit of information, especially since only a few years ago, we had been basically followed by creepers on a previous trip to our cabin. The whole situation was just a giant fucking downer. After a while, the cops finished up and let us know they would keep a cruiser in the area. Not that they would really help. And that they were going to check the other cabins for any signs of break-ins. I nailed my neighbor's door shut, dragged the picnic table off the ice. They had cut the chain. And headed back inside for a much-needed beer, or 3, or 4. We had debated a little bit about canceling the trip and heading back home for a staycation. But honestly, we were determined to enjoy our week because we had really been looking forward to it. So we decided to stay. The next couple of days were great. We did exactly what we planned on doing, which was mostly nothing. We watched movies, snuggled, and drank in excess. I made my world-famous chili, and my wife ate it. We had bacon, eggs, and mimosas for breakfast, beer, grilled cheese, and mediocre red box movies for lunch. And vodka tonics, hearty winter meals, and sexy times for dinner. It was awesome. Granted, every time we heard a snowmobile, we both gave each other an "oh shit" look, but after a few times we were joking about it, and our "oh shit" looks morphed into a game of who can make the funniest face. We were just generally having a great time. As much as we were enjoying being completely overindulgent bed bunnies, by midweek we wanted to stretch our legs, so we decided to go out for a hike. It was a beautiful day, and I knew the surrounding area very well, so I suggested we hike up the dam at the mouth of the river. Stream, really. It feeds the lake. It freezes over in winter and looks pretty cool. It was a 2 to 3 hour hike round trip, depending on the pace, short and sweet. We brought our dog along, And again, we're having a great time, enjoying the extremely scenic winter woods and each other's company. On our way back, things took an unfortunate turn. About 2-ish miles, 30 minutes from the cabin, we hear the whine of snowmobiles. We each made a funny face, joked, and then got quiet and kept listening. They were getting closer. At the time, it wasn't exactly unexpected. It was a gorgeous day out, and we were smack dab in the middle of prime snowmobile territory. But given everything that had happened earlier in the week, it was impossible to not feel a little uneasy. The snowmobiles kept getting closer, and the whine was getting louder and louder. My wife and I talked about something, but honestly, I wasn't really listening to her. I was going over the situation in my head, and I don't quite remember what we were talking about. The engine sounds were getting louder, and it was obvious they were coming down the same trail we were on. I suppose it could have been anyone. Perhaps a father and son enjoying the day, or a couple of friends off to meet up with some of their buddies. Regardless, I just got a very bad feeling. I carry, almost as a direct result of the last weird encounter I had at the cabin. So I made the decision to unholster, rack around into the chamber, and reholster, just in case. Not here to debate the pros, cons of guns or carrying +1. But I do what I do, and I did what I did, and I feel good about it. The trail we were on was about 5 to 6 feet wide, well traveled. So once the snowmobiles came into view, I picked up our dog. He's a little guy, but he thinks planet Earth is his, and the rest of us are just weird old visitors here to grace him with treats. And then we stood off to the edge of the trail so they could pass us. I think we played it pretty standard, as far as general common courtesy goes. As soon as they saw us, they both stopped in the middle of the trail, about 100 feet from where we were standing. I waved. They didn't wave back. I could see that they were talking back and forth, occasionally looking at us. They seemed to finish up their conversation, and then gunned their engines. Both of them started approaching us very fast, and appeared to be on a line to hit us. My wife and I stepped back a few steps into the brush as they fucking buzz us. At full throttle. I'm talking inches, not feet. They continue past us for a bit, and then stop, and turn to look back at us. I instinctively, almost as a reflex, threw up my free arm, holding a furiously barking Boston Terrier in the other, and yelled, "What the fuck is your problem?" One of them replied with a middle finger, revved the engine a few times, and then they both took off down the trail. My wife was a wreck afterwards. I was scared, but she was really scared. The trail we were on basically ends where our property begins. So if it was the same people from earlier in the week, they would know we weren't home. We had another 30 minutes of hiking before we got back, and the whole time we could hear the snowmobiles ahead of us. They didn't disappear and get farther away like before. The whole walk back, they were completely within earshot. After about 10 minutes, we could hear that they had stopped, and then started driving around at low RPM. The engines were running, but not at full throttle. After a few minutes, we stopped and waited. They started at full blast again, this time getting farther and farther away. We waited until we couldn't hear them again, and then headed for the cabin. When we got back, there were snowmobile tracks all around the property, out front and back. They had been circling the cabin. We had no way to call the police, so after an extremely short and extremely tense conversation, we promptly packed up, closed up the cabin, and left for home. Vacation officially ruined. We contacted the police, but there wasn't much to say other than a couple of assholes on snowmobiles almost ran us over. Then they drove all over our property. We may have been more selective with our words. The police were certainly sympathetic and, again, given the break-in at my neighbor's, they seemed pretty concerned about it. In the end, there wasn't much for them to do. We gave descriptions, our info, and left. The thing that gets me the most is that even though my wife acts like it didn't bother her too much, I know it did. I have been going to that cabin my entire life, and some of the best memories I have are up there, on that lake. Now, I not only have one, but two terrible and frightening experiences at that cabin. But the person I love the most in this world was potentially at risk. I'd never ask her to go somewhere she doesn't feel safe. And honestly, I'm not sure I feel safe going up there anymore. The good news is that both my neighbor and my family decided to have proper alarm systems installed, so at the very least someone will be alerted to any future break-in attempts. However, it still doesn't help with the fact that when you are far away from help, you are essentially at the mercy of others. I know and believe that the vast majority of people are good-natured, but I'm learning that all it takes is one person, or multiple in my case, to really ruin a day. No updates regarding the break-in as of yet. Thanks for listening. Stay safe out there. This is actually still an ongoing thing in my life. In all honesty, there's a lot of crap that's been going on in my life. I don't know why, but I guess I just sort of attract creeps. To give a little background to this particular occasion, I started dating a guy when I was 20. He was about 8 years older than me. Why yes, I do feel stupid in hindsight. I met this guy when I was at a friend's birthday party. She hadn't told me who else she'd be inviting, and I only knew like 4 out of 16 people, including her. The 4 people I knew were Elaine, the birthday girl, Christian, Martin, and Jacob. The guy who eventually became my boyfriend. Let's refer to him as, say, Jeff. Was someone Elaine had gotten to know via a D&D group she was in. Jeff was extremely forward. The entire party, he'd stick close to me and try to talk to me. When we were all sitting down to eat, he sat right across from me, staring and smiling. I was a bit uncomfortable with the attention he was giving me, but I brushed it off as me just not being comfortable with being stared at. Christian asked me at one point if I wanted him to ask Jeff to stop. I just said no, because he hadn't really done anything. When the party ended, Jeff offered to walk me home. I said that it wasn't needed, as I lived only about 5 minutes away and it wasn't particularly late. Still, he insisted, and I didn't know how to tell him to buzz off. As we walked, he started telling me that he found me very attractive and wanted to date me. I was a bit confused. I mean, we didn't even know each other. But Jeff acted like he'd known me his entire life. And when I called him on that, he simply told me that Elaine had told him a lot about me, on account of her and me being very close friends. I tried to convey the point that I wasn't really interested in anything romantic, partly because I didn't know him at all. He told me that was fine, and that it could be purely physical if I wanted it to be. No, that I hadn't had sex for 2 years at that point, and my libido was going haywire. Jeff wasn't particularly ugly either, so my starved libido took control and stated that, yeah, that would be fine. So yeah, boyfriend, girlfriend. I honestly wouldn't have said anything to him if I had known what was going to happen. We'd had a thing going on for maybe 2 weeks before he started to call me literally several times a day. I got very frustrated, as I am fond of having my alone time, and didn't always answer. If I didn't, Jeff would be worried and ask Elaine to contact me to see if I was fine. Whenever I did go to see Jeff just to have sex, he started asking me stuff along the lines of, would you like to have kids? And wouldn't you want to move out of your dad's place? And so on. I'd give vague answers at best, and never directly relate them to anything regarding relationships. Apparently, Jeff interpreted them as being such anyway. We'd been together for maybe 2 months when I started to ignore his calls and texts entirely. He was smothering me, demanding to see me every day and demanding that I always be available for him to talk to. I tried to tell him multiple times that what we had was nothing binding, only a physical relationship, only for the sex. I was not in love with him, and I was not out for a romantic relationship with anyone. He didn't get the point. It took maybe a week of me ignoring him for Elaine to call me out of the blue and starting to accuse me of making her friend miserable. I told her I didn't know what the fuck she was talking about. I'm talking about Jeff, she told me. He says you haven't answered him for over a week now. What the fuck is wrong with you? I told her what he'd been doing, and that I just wasn't comfortable with it. I also explained that I told him to knock it off, which she didn't believe. Oh, you better fucking call him right now, she told me. He needs to hear your voice. He just wants to know if you're okay. Some fucking best friend, right? I didn't call Jeff until the next day, and only after having made the decision that I had to break things off. We decided that we'd meet in the park in the middle of town. This didn't sit too well with him because he wanted me to come to his place. But I wanted a more public place, just so that he wouldn't make a scene or try anything stupid. When we did meet, he did his usual smiley stuff. He acted like nothing was wrong. He even brought flowers and chocolate for me, which I told him immediately that I wasn't going to accept. He just asked me what I wanted to talk about, and I told him I wanted to break things off. The more I told him about how clingy he was getting with a person who wasn't romantically interested in him, the more his smile faded. He looked utterly crushed, like I'd taken everything he loved and just set it on fire. But you can't do that, he told me. We were going to move in together. You wanted to have kids with me. I've been looking at rings and everything. You can't do this to me. Rings. It boggles the fucking mind how he hadn't understood anything I'd said about not being interested in him romantically. I still don't know how the fuck that happened. I persisted and told him that that was his problem, not mine. I'd made things clear from the start, and I'd never shown any signs of a romantic interest. He became very upset. He started crying. And he said that he had nothing left to live for if I left him. He told me that as soon as I left him in the park, he'd just go home and hang himself. The problem with this statement is that I had two friends at the time who have been through similar breakups, and they had been reeled back in by this because they were actually romantically attached. I was not, and I knew that what he was trying to pull was a bullshit manipulative tactic. I called him on it. "You'll be fine," I told him. "No, you're not going to fucking kill yourself. Just go home, Jeff, and think things through. All the same, we're done." I thought that would be the end of things. I was certain that I wasn't going to be bothered by him again. I got calls from Elaine for about 2 weeks afterwards, and continuous questions from friends who wanted to know why I broke up with such a nice guy. Elaine, in particular, was very stubborn, and didn't believe me when I said that he threatened to kill himself if I left him. Fast forward about 2 years. I just started dating a girl from a school I went to, and I was feeling pretty content. I knew from Facebook posts and frequent updates from Elaine that Jeff was now engaged to a girl we can call Celia, and that he seemed to be feeling alright. I didn't think much about it, so when Elaine's birthday party came around, and we were both invited, I didn't feel like it would be awkward. During the party, Jeff spent a lot of time eyeing me and smiling at me. I tried not to make eye contact with him, and spent most of my time talking to my friends. Then Celia pulled me to the side and started asking me if Jeff had ever acted weird when I was with him. I explained to her that we never had a romantic relationship, only a sexual one, and that I didn't spend much time with him outside of that. She looked really uncomfortable, and told me that she happened to see his Facebook open on his laptop the other day. He'd been sending messages to a 13-year-old girl from the area. Celia knew the girl's mother. They had been talking about sex, and Jeff had been giving advice to her. Celia could even cite some of the things he suggested that the girl should do during sex. And I could easily identify that these were things that he, in particular, found sexy. Was I angry? No. I was fucking furious. Celia really did seem like a nice girl, and she was in a relationship with a sleazeball who was apparently sending blatantly sexual messages to a 13-year-old. I told her that she could either break up with him or tell the police. She did neither. She called me about 2 weeks later and said that they'd had a heart-to-heart talk about things, and he had denied everything. But he had stopped messaging that girl. I wasn't too certain. It was around this time that I started getting very sexual messages in my Facebook feed from his profile. He said that he missed me, that he missed holding me close, missed fucking me. He missed it when it was just us. At first I just ignored it. At least he wasn't talking to a teenager anymore. Then his messages started getting threatening. He said that seeing me had reminded him of how much he'd loved me, and how I had betrayed him. He talked about how I'd crushed his heart and how he wanted to get back at me for it. I got messages along the lines of, "I'll come see you at your school, and I'll fuck you in the dining hall before I take care of you." I should have told the police at this point, but I didn't. I just got angry and finally messaged back. I told him that if he kept messaging me, I'd just screenshot every single message and send it to Celia. I'd send it to Elaine as well. And she'd finally see what a fucking asshole he was, and wouldn't defend him anymore. He did send more messages. He had found my then girlfriend's profile and talked about how heartbroken I would be when she broke up with me. He said he'd tell her what a tease I was, that I was incapable of loving anyone, and that she should get out while she still could. I did message Celia about this, and she listened to every word and talked to Jeff. Maybe it's a credit to her personality to know that she was patient enough and loved him enough to not leave him. Or maybe she just doesn't see how fucked in the head this guy is. Yeah, they're still together. Married by now. I still get messages from Jeff every now and then, but I delete them without reading. The only glimpse I've caught has been about my current fiancé, and how he'd love to fuck my life up the way I fucked him over. The few times I've seen Jeff downtown when I've been out with my fiancé, I've grabbed her hand and pulled her across the street, away from him. I'm not scared of him, but every time I see him, my body goes into fight or flight mode, and it settles on fight, with focus on rage. And all this because he's too fucked in the head to see that someone's not interested in him. Update. I spoke to Celia this morning. She called me rather out of the blue and asked if Jeff had messaged me lately. I had been very antsy about showing her the messages at all, beyond what I told her he had said about my ex. But I said that he messages me every now and then. She got very specific and said, "Has he sent you any sexual or threatening messages?" To which the only answer was, of course, yes. Celia told me that Jeff is out of town right now for work. She has decided to seize the moment and go to the police, and she wanted to see the messages. A bit surprising, really, as they've been married for a while now. I asked her about this, and she told me that she's out of patience. She had hoped that he wouldn't do anything stupid with her around, but she can't keep an eye on him every minute of every day. She's afraid of what will happen. She also told me that he's been talking to her niece, who is 12, over Facebook. Her niece had given him her Tumblr URL, and for the past few weeks, the girl has apparently received very sexual and intimidating messages via Tumblr. Needless to say, Celia is currently very angry. I just sent her the screenshots I've taken of the messages, and she has gone to the police station with every bit of information she has managed to gather. For all that I think she has been far too patient, I can only say bless this woman. About 5 months ago, a friend of mine got expelled from his program because of bad marks. He was only halfway through his lease and he didn't see a point of staying in the city since he was only there for school. He told me that if I wanted to take over his lease as a subletter, he would only charge me half of the rent, which I thought was a pretty sweet deal. So naturally, although I am from this town, I thought it was time to leave my parents' place. I had already graduated and Although I had been looking for a new job for a while, I still felt like I couldn't miss out on the opportunity. So I took over his lease and moved into his place. The house itself is actually pretty nice. It's 3 floors including the basement, and it's located near the university of my town, which is not a very safe area overall, but I spent a lot of my university years here and never felt unsafe. The room in the basement is pretty small but cozy, and the only other room down here is a girl who is currently a student, and she's pretty quiet. Actually, all the girls living here are pretty good roommates. I wasn't thrilled about living with 3 girls, but I don't see why I would have thought it was an issue. They're all pretty great and a good time. I'm the only one in the house who is not a student, and also the only one who is originally from this town. The other roommates are actually all from cities that are only about an hour or 2 away at most, so unless there's something special going on, they all go home on weekends. My friend who got expelled also only lives 2 hours away, so he would always go home for the weekend as well. One thing I forgot to mention, which is pretty crucial to the story, is that the house actually has 5 rooms, but right when they all moved into a new place together, one of the girls had a seizure on her bed and passed away. This was pretty upsetting for everyone, and the landlord told them not to worry about finding anyone else. Their rent never went up or anything, and the room was left vacant. According to the landlord, he just found it insensitive to try and find someone because he didn't want to turn someone's death into a financial inconvenience for him. So after the girl's death, the parents came and took her belongings out of the room, and it just remained empty since then. I actually never looked in there because it just remained locked, and I don't really have much curiosity to see the room. It's on the 2nd floor, and I never go up there, so I never paid any attention to it. The first weekend I spent there was pretty uneventful. I remember that I spent one night at my boyfriend's place, and then the next night he slept over after we went out drinking at one of the college bars near the place. We were pretty wasted, so we passed out as soon as we got home. The next weekend I was home in my new room, and I couldn't sleep, so I decided to read a little bit. I was really enjoying the quietness of this new house since the girls weren't home at all. I come from a Latino family, so this quiet and serene environment was pretty rare. I thought that I heard a few noises upstairs, so I figured that one of the girls had probably decided to stay the weekend at the house. Or she was just getting last-minute things ready before heading home. I really didn't think much of this thing. I wasn't very close with the roommates, so I didn't even bother asking if any of them had stayed home. I just felt like it was none of my business. The girl in the basement was for sure gone for the weekend because she apparently sleeps with her door locked and keeps it open when she's not home. One weekend, that same month, I woke up to pee and I could hear a toilet flushing upstairs, which was kind of weird since I knew that none of the girls were home. I was going to go check it out, but in my tired state I was too lazy and just didn't care enough. It's funny. Horror movies are supposed to make you paranoid, but the biggest lesson I got from them was that there's always a rational explanation for things. This would prove to be my biggest mistake because for a couple months I was always brushing things off and ironically creating irrational explanations to rationalize what I thought were irrational thoughts. For example, I heard creaking coming from the 2nd floor and figured one of the girls must have forgotten something, and decided to come by to pick it up. The girl must have driven 2 hours down and 2 hours back to her town in the middle of the night to pick something up. One Saturday, I woke up to get some water, and I noticed that the roommate in the basement was gone. Her door was open, and her car was not in the driveway. There weren't any cars in the driveway, but I should mention that one of the girls doesn't drive. A couple hours later, I woke up because I heard steps coming down into the basement. At this point, I yelled out the girl's name who doesn't drive because she is the only one who could have been in the house. I didn't get a reply and just heard the steps going back upstairs. At this point, I started getting uneasy about being home on weekends, so I decided to just spend them at my boyfriend's house. One of the girls made a house Facebook page, which was supposed to address any issues like washing dishes or leaving messes, but it remained pretty inactive since everyone seemed to get along. I posted on there that some creepy stuff was happening on weekends and asked them if they could start letting me know if they'd be home for the night or not. They seriously thought I was joking around. The replies were not receptive at all and consisted of LMAO or OMG, you're so funny. Even my boyfriend agreed that I was being paranoid because he too believed that everything has a rational and perfect explanation. The thing is, when you say that everything has an explanation, you are only invalidating paranormal explanations or ghostly activity, which is not what I was implying at all. I've never believed in ghosts or spirits or any of that jazz, and I never claimed to when I spoke to my roommates or to my boyfriend. They kept on saying that the house was old and made noises, but I know the difference between old house noises and someone walking down the stairs and back up the stairs. Fortunately, my roommates did start posting things on the Facebook page to let me know they'd be gone. It was always to the effect of, "Hey, getting fired, lol. I won't be home this weekend, so don't worry about the ghosts." One weekend, they all let me know that they would not be home, and my boyfriend was on the midnight shift, so I had to spend the night on my own. My boyfriend called me on his break, and while I was on the phone with him, I heard noises on the main floor. I told him I was going to check it out, and he told me to go ahead because the motherfucker still thought I was being paranoid. As I said this, I heard the footsteps going back up to the second floor. Once I got onto the main floor, there was nobody in the kitchen, and all the doors into the house were locked. I was extremely paranoid and did not feel safe. My boyfriend calmed me down and convinced me that everything was okay. So I never went to the second floor, and it's probably best that I stayed on the main floor. After that weekend, I told my roommates in all seriousness that I was convinced that someone had been in our house at some point that night. I told them what I heard, and the fucking bitches still claimed that it was the old house making noises. My boyfriend was almost permanently on midnight, so I did what I never wanted to do, and started spending weekends at my parents' place. The girls still posted on the page whether or not they were leaving the house or not, and I decided that I should do the same. So I started posting when I was and was not sleeping at the house. On Friday night, the Facebook page looked something like this: Roommate 1, not sleeping at home. Roommate 2, not sleeping at home. Roommate 3, staying home because of my midterm exams. Me, I'm staying at my parents' place. The next morning, I received a frantic text from one of the roommates saying that the roommate with the midterms had been attacked. Apparently, she was in her room studying and heard a noise right outside of her bedroom. When she went out to inspect it, she was greeted by a man walking out of the dead girl's room. I later found out more details about the whole thing from the roommate who was attacked. The man looked rough, greasy hair, and just a dirty, dirty face. When they made eye contact, he held his finger up to his mouth and uttered a shh while smiling. The nail on his finger was long, and his beard was apparently really scraggly and uneven, like it only grew on certain parts of his face. She screamed out of instinct, even though she knew there was nobody in the house. He lunged at her as she tried to shut the door, and she wasn't beaten up too badly. He just growled and told her to shut her mouth and said something like, "I'm not gonna rape you, but shut your mouth." He beat her, but not completely unconscious. And then, when he walked out of her room, he went downstairs and walked out the front door. So he left the dead girl's room unlocked. My roommate locked herself in her room and called the police, who were there immediately. What's pretty creepy about the whole thing is that when they inspected the dead girl's room, they kept asking for clarification. So nobody has lived in this room for how long? Nobody has been renting this room, right? Did the parents take everything after the girl passed away? The guy had a really sweet setup, actually, and had brought his own small mattress to put over the bed frame. Obviously, the mattress was too small for the bed frame. He left most of his stuff because he probably didn't expect a confrontation that night. I don't think he knew she would be there that night because she never was. It probably sucked for him when I moved in because before me, the bastard had the whole house to himself 2 days a week. The police did ask me quite a lot of questions and were very interested in hearing my statement about hearing footsteps at night. My 3 roommates and my friend are now convinced that maybe the girl didn't die the way they said she did, and maybe he murdered her. But I think the autopsy would have been able to distinguish a murder from a seizure. In their defense, the whole thing is really creepy. We're not really sure how long the guy had been living here, but it's very likely that it has been for at least a few months. The theory is that the guy has been climbing in through the window, so it's possible that he was even there at times when all of us were there. The police are really interested in talking to the landlord because they want to know how the man found out about the vacant room. The landlord is a pretty decent guy, so I don't know if there's anything going on there. I don't even feel an "I told you so" attitude from the whole thing. I think that I'm just glad that the girl is okay because she seemed pretty shaken up. I just wish people were more willing to listen to me when I told them that I thought somebody was coming into our home. I even said it might be a squatter, which everyone laughed at. This happened very recently, so it might be a while before an update. As of now, the man has not been found, but the police remain optimistic about finding him. Whatever that means. This has been a pretty terrible month for me, and I don't know if I want to be at this house anymore. I don't have much left on the lease, and I recently lost my job, so it might be best for me to leave the place now. I doubt the guy will come back because all of his stuff has been taken out. But I still find it creepy in this house. I definitely don't spend weekends here anymore. So I spent most days of my summer vacations prowling the woods close to my home. After about half-hour walk from my house, down dirt roads and overgrown deer trails, there was a sandy stretch of beach along a creek. Since it was so far removed from civilization, I had never seen another soul out there at the creek. I would often strip down naked and swim in the water to cool down under the summer sun. When I was a young girl, about 8 or 9 years old, I had gone down to my secret beach to go skinny dipping. I had spent all morning there, watching herons splashing in the water happily. Suddenly I began to hear the sounds of something large forcing its way through the undergrowth upstream a ways. I was frozen, standing naked in the middle of the creek as two men emerged from the woods. They were much older than me, probably in their 30s. Something about the way they were dressed scared me. Anyone who has spent a lot of time in the woods knows the danger of thorn vines and brambles. But these guys were dressed in flip-flops, cargo shorts, and wife beaters. They were filthy and covered in scratches across their arms and legs, looking as if hiking through the woods hadn't ever been on their agenda. I'd left my clothes in an untidy pile on the bank, but to grab them, I would have had to move much closer to the men. As I frantically tried to think of a way to get back to my clothes without alerting these guys, one of them turned and locked eyes with me. I grew up around southern manners, seeing as I was a naked girl trying to cover myself with my hands as I stood in the middle of a creek. I would have expected him to avert his gaze, but all he did was elbow his buddy in the ribs, point at me, and whisper something beyond my hearing. When they both turned and began to advance towards me, malicious grins on their faces, I officially lost my shit. Luckily, years of spending all my free time in the woods paid off. Forgetting modesty, I turned and ran at breakneck speed for the closest downstream deep channel. As I dove into the water, I could hear the men yelling and splashing behind me, trying desperately to catch up. I had always been at home in the water, and at this moment I swam as though my life depended on it, which it very well might have. I knew exactly where I needed to go. Earlier that summer, I discovered what I thought of as my secret hiding spot. The banks were rocky and sheer on both sides of the creek here, around the bend and downstream from the sandy beach. I had been watching muskrats swimming in the water, and had seen one swimming through hanging kudzu vines into what I thought was solid stone. Upon pulling back the vines and scaring the shit out of the muskrat in the process, I found an open space under an overhanging rock. I had always loved hiding and was immediately smitten with such a perfectly camouflaged spot. But weeks later, in this moment, I thought of it as my best hope. As I came close to my hiding spot, I ducked down and swam underwater to my hole in the stone. I only surfaced once I was safely behind my curtain of kudzu vines. I waited there several minutes, trying to silence my breathing and slow my rampaging heartbeat, until I heard the sounds of heavy crashing through the underbrush. I screamed a little, but thankfully had clamped a hand over my mouth in time to muffle it. As the sounds of snapping twigs and rustling leaves got closer, I could hear the men panting and cursing under their breath. It sounded as if they were walking on the edge of the bank a few feet above me. After they had moved down a ways, I heard a thud on the ground and an angry yell, as if one of the men had tripped and fallen. Another voice shushed him and said something that made me tremble. "Shut up, she'll hear you." I had never been more terrified at that moment. I cried silently, pressing my back against a rock and praying they wouldn't find me. Even after I heard their footsteps continuing down the bank and into silence, I remained hidden behind the kudzu. I stayed there, delirious with fear and shivering in the water, until the sun had begun to dip low in the sky. I finally began to make my way back to get my clothes and go home, picking my way along deer trails that would let me move as silently as possible. When I had gotten close to the beach, I stayed hidden in the undergrowth and watched for several minutes to make sure those two slime balls weren't anywhere around. Thankfully, although I found several footprints circling my clothes and pacing along the bank, the guys were nowhere to be seen. My shirt and jeans were still there, luckily, but my panties were gone. I threw my clothes on and ran the whole way home. I never told my mother about what happened at the creek, because I knew she would ban me from ever going into the woods again. I never saw those guys again, nor did I even see anyone else down at that stretch of beach after that. Needless to say, I never went skinny dipping again. So creepy man who would chase a naked little girl through the woods, let's not meet. This took place several years ago, when I was only 18 and freshly enrolled in college. I grew up in an extremely strict household, Asian female by the way. My parents set my curfew at 8 p.m. I wasn't allowed to drive at night or go to parties, etc. All because my family was convinced that all of these situations led to rape. Anyway, you could see how once I moved out of the house, I relished any opportunity to exercise my new freedom and independence. One night at around 11 p.m. I got super hungry and had a real craving for an Arby's roast beef sandwich. My roommate was tired and didn't want to go with, so I hopped in my car and decided to make a quick trip by myself. To get to Arby's, I had to take a stretch of road that was really secluded and not well lit. Of course, at that time of night, there were barely any cars on the road. At a stoplight just a few blocks from the Arby's, I was the third car waiting at a red light. Car A was in the very front, Car B was behind it, and I was behind Car B. The last car, Car C, that was behind me. All of a sudden, I guess he must have thought the light turned, but it was still red. The car in front of me stepped on the gas and lurched forward, tapping the back of the car in front of him. The two drivers immediately got out and started looking at the damage. Neither of them were hurt, and there was little to no damage that I could see made to either car. I had no idea what to do in that situation. Again, I was a dumb 18-year-old, just ejected into the adult world, and I had never witnessed an accident of any kind before. Was I supposed to stick around as a witness or something? I wasn't sure. But I felt very uneasy about the idea of getting out my car in the middle of the night on a really isolated road to talk to these two guys, especially when I didn't think they needed my intervention at all. Again, it was a super minor fender bender, and they were talking about it civilly, though they didn't move their cars. So when the light turned green, I decided to just move over into the other lane and proceed on my way. Again, this may have been the wrong thing to do, but I didn't know any better. The car that had been behind me did not like that I was trying to leave. To this day, I have no idea what they were thinking. At the time, I thought that they must have thought I caused the accident, or something. Anyway, as I shifted over to the other lane to leave, they started blasting their horn at me. I got super scared and proceeded down the road past the green light, and the car C, the one behind me, took off after me. What ensued was still the most terrifying experience I've ever had. The car, which I could only dimly see had 2 male figures in the front seat, followed me closely for quite a while, occasionally blasting their horn aggressively. They would speed up until they were about to hit the back of my car. I was starting to get really freaked out, so I started making random turns to lose them, or to see if they were really following me. They definitely were. I made 3 left turns and they were still on my tail. Eventually the car pulled over into the lane beside me and kept speeding up and nudging into my lane, as if to cut me off or run me off the road. I was actually crying now, and I had called my then boyfriend, telling him what was happening. I initially wanted to drive to his house, but then I realized I didn't want these psychos knowing where he lived. I tried to avoid making eye contact with the 2 men in the car beside me, and tried not to let them intimidate me off the road. They kept blaring their horn, and then eventually the driver rolled down the window. I was too scared to talk to him, but I could hear what he screamed clearly through my window, which had a slight gap in the top that never sealed up.
"We're gonna catch you, bitch. I'm gonna rip your dumb ass."
I think the guy next to him said something like, "Don't slow down," or something. But I couldn't hear it as clearly over the rushing of the wind and the sounds of our cars accelerating. My boyfriend heard them shouting from over the phone and directed me to the nearest police station, which was about 8 minutes away from where I was. It was actually hard for him to find the police station, or to give me directions to it because I had no idea where I was. The 2 guys kept shouting things at me, but I don't know what else was said because I was too busy blubbering to my boyfriend. Maybe it's really hard to remember what went on in these moments physically. I was speeding so fast to try to get away from these guys at this point that I was hoping a cop would stop me. There were no cars on any of the roads we went down, and it just made everything worse and worse. And then my phone battery decided it was time to die. I seriously thought I was in one of the horror stories my parents had always told me about. Eventually I saw the police station my boyfriend had given me directions to, almost drove past it, and turned into the parking lot. The car followed me and the passenger door actually opened before the car even stopped. But then I think they noticed where they were, and they drove out of there fast. I sat in my car too terrified to get out because I thought moving would provoke them into coming back. Literally 60 seconds later, my boyfriend pulled into the parking lot next to my car and climbed out with a baseball bat. He held me for a while, and then a cop who was pulling into the lot or something coming out of the building approached us and asked us if everything was okay. It turns out that the car that had tailed me fit the description of a car that had apparently scared the girl so badly, same type of thing, late night, empty road, lone driver, super aggressive driving and screaming, that she crashed her car into a tree in a divider trying to get away from these guys. Neither she nor I got a license plate though, and to this day, I don't know if they ever caught those guys. I don't know what kind of human being gets their kicks out of terrorizing female drivers late at night on the road. But whoever they were, fuck those guys. I hope someone, somewhere, managed to put a stop to them. When I was young, my mother and I took the bus a lot because she didn't have a car. This incident happened during that stretch of time. More specifically, when I was around age 5 or 6. We were at the closest bus stop to my house, which is situated right next to a fairly large tree. I remember it being a pretty nice afternoon, bright and breezy, and my mom was reading one of her paperback novels while I inspected the trunk of the tree for small lizards. We lived in Florida, which is swarming with anoles. I was really into animals back then, and I loved pretending I was tracking down dangerous critters like Steve Irwin. My search was proving to be kind of fruitless though, since I was making a lot of noise by stomping around, and I'm sure any lizards nearby had heard me and were already well hidden from the grasp of my chubby little hands. Nevertheless, I kept up the hunt and eventually, forgetting that I was supposed to stay within my mother's line of sight, went around the other side of the tree to look. The bench Mom was sitting on was now out of my view, and she, likewise, wouldn't have been able to see me if she looked up. She was quite absorbed into her book, however, and thus wouldn't be aware of what was going on until it was almost too late. As I scrabbled about on my hands and knees in the grass by the tree, I heard light footsteps coming up a ways behind me, and turned around to see a man making his way towards me. I don't remember much about how he looked, but I know he seemed very tall. The way the sun was facing placed most of his frame in the shadow of the tree, which gives my recollection of him a vaguely surreal quality. At the time, though, he was just a man who was looking at me. He greeted me warmly as I stared up at him, and asked me what I was doing outside all alone. I guess he hadn't seen my mother because of the tree, and thought I was unsupervised. I'd always been a shy child, particularly around adults, so I didn't respond, choosing to continue looking at him. I was a little wary, but he didn't seem like a threat, and it was the middle of the afternoon. He seemed to take my silence as a confirmation of his assumption, because he followed up his previous question by telling me he was taking a walk and asking me if I'd like to join him to get some ice cream. He didn't wait for me to answer this time, but continued a gentle stream of words, saying he liked my dress and wanted to be my friend. As he was speaking, I noticed that he was slowly stepping closer and closer to me. I was beyond mere wariness at this point, and my mind was sliding towards something more akin to alarm. But I didn't know if I'd be able to run away from him before he could reach me. My family had always warned me not to go anywhere with strangers, and the serious concern on their faces when they told me had made me certain that following an unknown person was a very scary, bad thing. even if I wasn't old enough to understand why at the time. When the man was within arm's length of me, he reached out his hand and brushed the tips of his fingers against my shoulder. I'll never forget that moment. How my bubble of personal space had been pressed inward and then pierced. Whatever spell of silence I had been under was immediately broken, and I screamed as loud as I could, twisting violently away from his hand. The man flinched and froze, seeming to calculate what his next move would be, now that I was proving to be less of an easy target than he expected. His decision was made for him when my mom, jolted out of her reading by my cry, appeared from around the other side of the tree and spotted us. She screeched at him. I've never seen her that angry again in all my life, and he immediately spun to flee without a word. A shiny black car that I hadn't noticed before was parked on the side of the road, a pretty good distance away from us. And when the man reached it, he got into it quickly and sped off. He never paused to start it up, which means it must have been running the entire time it was sitting there. This small detail didn't mean much to my immature mind at the time, but remembering it now gives me chills. It's pretty obvious that he wasn't just some friendly guy on a stroll who happened upon a lonely child. He had spied me from the road, stopped his car, and left it running for a speedy getaway once he'd snatched me up. I can only imagine where he truly would have taken me if I hadn't alerted my mom or put up a fight. Bit of backstory. I am female, was 15 at the time, fairly petite, and dangerously polite. My brother was 12, my cousin was 4 years old, but was, and still is, much taller and more built than his age, as he takes after his giant of a father. It's the summer of 2013, so sorry if some details are a little fuzzy, and my parents are struggling with their finances. We can't go on fancy vacations, so they ship us off to our aunt and uncle's place, a couple of times over. They're happy to have us, as my cousin is an only child, and liked having someone to play with. It's our 4th or 5th, can't really remember, day there. A Saturday. My uncle works in the nearby city, and is finally back from an extended stay. He wants to take us to a zoo about 45 minutes from their house, as it's really big and has a great elephant exhibit, my cousin's favorite animal. My aunt decides not to go, as she's recovering from a bad ankle sprain, so my uncle decides to take all 3 of us by himself. Was this the smartest idea? Probably not. But I was more than capable of helping to look after my brother and cousin, and had done it multiple times by myself before. My uncle's also huge, as mentioned. He stands at about 6'5" and weighs a solid 240. And he looks really intimidating too, with a clean-shaved head and big muscles. However, the phrase, gentle giant, has never applied more to someone else. We drive for about 20 minutes before we stop at a gas station to use the restroom, get drinks and snacks, stretch, etc. It's your standard 7-Eleven, but more long from entrance to the back of the store than it is wide, if that makes sense. The drinks are in the back of the store, so after using the bathroom, we go there. My uncle wants to buy chips, as he has a serious savory tooth, and heads to the next aisle to check the selection out. My brother's being impossible about his drink choice, so we're standing there, trying to decide what to get when a guy enters the same aisle as us. Keep in mind, it's been all of 2 minutes since our uncle left us. He's sort of old, maybe late 50s, and looks a lot like Santa Claus. It sounds crazy saying it now, but for a second, I was genuinely stunned into thinking this guy was the jolly fat man from Christmas movies. White hair, bit of a white beard, small little spectacles covering twinkling eyes, and a button nose, lightly tinted pink. I think his appearance lulled me into a less suspicious state. The only thing that didn't resemble Santa was his outfit. Something more summer appropriate I can't put my finger on today. And the type of twinkle in his eye. Sure, Santa may have liked kids, but he didn't like them that much. He starts off by lingering 5 feet away from us, pretending to check out drinks while glancing over from time to time. My guard is up, but I just grip both my brother and cousin's hands and remind myself that my uncle is just the next aisle over. He slowly inches closer to us, with a weird shuffling motion, and when he's about a foot away, he smiles really widely. "Your brother is really adorable," he says really quietly, almost in a whisper. My grip automatically tightens on my brother's hand, but then I realize it's my baby cousin the guy is talking about, as he's staring right at him. At this point, the dangerously polite part of my brain kicks in, and I say thank you. Stupid, I know. But although I'm not naive, some of the manners drilled into my head always come back to me at the worst times. Besides, my cousin was pretty cute, as he was a bit chubby and had big brown eyes, rosy cheeks, and a dimpled smile. My brother has yet to acknowledge the guy as he didn't hear him, and is concentrated on picking his drink. The guy inches a bit closer as I inch a little away, and try to push my brother and pull my cousin as subtly as possible. "I have a granddaughter close to his age. Why don't you get in my car, and I'll take you to her so your brother and she can play." I look young for my age, but I must have looked especially young that day if that guy thought I was going to get anywhere near him or his car. "No thanks, sir." I try to say as firmly and menacingly as possible, raising my voice a little. The guy notices and looks a little panicked as he scans the area quickly and shoves his hand into his pocket. He pulls out a second later and opens a fist to reveal gummy vitamins, the ones covered in sugar that your parents used to trick you with to take them. Now remembering them to each be individually wrapped with what I think was saran wrap, with about 5 gummies in total. "Here, take these. You kids need your vitamins," he insists, trying to shove them at me. At this point, I'm done being polite, and I loudly shout, "Uncle Tim!" He's there in a flash, and nearly gave the guy a heart attack as he must have not realized the huge guy in the next aisle was with us. We're Asian, he's Caucasian, and since my aunt is Asian, my cousin looks more like us than him. The guy takes one look at my uncle and dashes for the front door. My uncle chases him, but he's much slower, as this guy is surprisingly fast for a mid-50s man. And by the time my uncle gets to the entrance, The guy has jumped into a car with the engine still running and peels out. My uncle informs the store clerk, who in turn calls the police, who show up 20 minutes later and can't really do anything about the situation as we didn't get a license plate. We do give a description and they send a patrol car out to look for him, but by then he was long gone. We ended up going straight home after, as the incident shook my uncle up really badly, and I think to this day he still blames himself for not sticking directly by our side. It's only a couple days later that shit actually hits the fan. The guy had dropped the gummy vitamins on the floor in his haste to leave, and the police had taken them to get tested. The results came back, and the stuff I thought at the time was sugar wasn't actually sugar. It was meth powder. So to the sick fuck that tried to give little kids gummy bears coated with meth, I honestly hope you rot in hell. Note: my parents were informed of the incident and nearly had heart attacks, especially when they find out about the contents of the gummies. We did go to a police lineup about a week later to try to identify the guy, but none of the suspects were him. All I could tell the police was that he was Santa Claus. This all happened when I was about 15 years old. I was going through a pretty difficult time. I just revealed to my parents about the sexual abuse I had suffered through at age 8 by my half-brother, who was 7 years older than me. This was coupled with the fact that I had depressive episodes and suicidal thoughts starting at the age of 11 from being bullied by my older sister for many years. I'm guessing my parents told my grandmother about what I was going through because she, in turn, told my mother about a man at church who was a psychologist. She thought it would be a good idea for me to talk everything out with a nice Christian man who dealt with this sort of thing. At this time in my life, I was already hinting to my mom that I wanted to go speak to a therapist. So I agreed to meet with him, despite feeling nervous. So, the weekend arrived and he came over. Our introduction wasn't at all creepy. He had a friendly face, kind smile, and was at least in his early 30s. Nothing ever indicated that he had bad intentions. He suggested that we go for a ride in his car and just talk. The thought of being in a casual setting made it less intimidating to me, so I had no problem with this. So I said goodbye to my mom and grandma, and we went on our way. The ride began with a minor chit-chat and exchanging pleasantries. He asked me if I'd ever been to a certain small town near my city, and I told him no. So he decided to take me there. I don't know how quickly it started, but soon enough, he started heavily complimenting my appearance, telling me that I was a very beautiful girl, and talking about how cute I was. At first, I just thought he was being a nice guy and didn't think it was too sinister. And as such, I blushed and said thank you in response. I wasnwasn't very used to compliments. My feelings changed, however, when he started rubbing my upper thigh. Being a victim of sexual abuse, this immediately made me uncomfortable. I knew this was becoming inappropriate. We talked about school, what I wanted to be when I grew up, my interests, etc. And he made sure to let me know how intelligent and mature I was. Thinking about it now, it was definitely grooming behavior. What made it worse was that he was driving way too fast. I'm talking 20 miles over the speed limit. I was feeling increasingly unsafe and wished I had not asked to be put in a situation like this. All I wanted to do was go home. He eventually took me to a Robin's Donuts in the small town and bought me an ice cap. While I drank it, his eyes never left me. I mostly kept my eyes down on basically anywhere else besides him. He asked me if he could see me again, and not wanting to create an uncomfortable situation, I lied and said yes. After I finished the drink, he took me to a nearby dock and held my hand. Alarm bells were ringing in my head, and all I wanted was for this nightmare to end. Eventually, he decided that we should head home. So back to the car we went. Cue more ridiculous speeding and thigh rubbing. Thankfully, he never went too high. When we got back to my house, I couldn't get inside fast enough. I was so relieved to be away from him. He went to go talk to my grandmother. Apparently, they were quite close. And I overheard him talking to her about meeting with me again sometime. I shuddered at the thought. Then finally, he went to say goodbye to me, and I smiled my fakest smile and bid him adieu. When he was gone, I agonized about whether or not I should tell someone about what happened. I didn't want to tell my grandmother because she obviously loved him as if he was her child, and I didn't want to ruin her image of him. I entertained the idea of just sucking it up and seeing him because I was finally talking to a therapist like I always wanted. But I just couldn't. I couldn't be stuck in a cramped space with him like that again. And I was worried that it would escalate. So the next day, I asked my mom to meet me in the basement because I had to urgently tell her something. Once there, I didn't really know how to explain how I felt, so I just told her that I didn't want to see him again because he acted as if I was his girlfriend. My mom instantly understood what I meant and told me that she talked to Grandma about it. Later that night, I heard her telling my grandma that I'd prefer talking to a woman instead. Grandma was kind of confused about this, but didn't argue. I'm happy to tell you guys that I never saw that creep again. I honestly don't know what ever became of him or if he ever asked about me. I just hope that he didn't end up preying on anyone else. So a bit of backstory. I am 16, female, and quite petite at 5'2", 100 pounds. The friend that was with me was also 16 and female, but stands around 5'7", 5'8". We both live really close to our high school, and thus often walk home together after school. The road to our houses is really well lit, and usually very busy. But when we turn into the side street that our houses sit on, the traffic cuts off to a minimum, if anything at all. So we usually walk home in broad daylight, and it's a safe neighborhood, so we're not too worried about creepers, stalkers, general weirdos, etc. That day, we stayed after school a little later than usual, but by no means was it dark out. We'd left around 5, with plenty of sun to still light our way. We turn into our subdivision, and suddenly hear the low rumble of a large car starting up behind us. Think of a really old car that's on its last leg, and couldn't drive quietly even if it wanted to. No idea where this guy came from, but there's a large supermarket on the main street, with a huge parking lot, so he could have easily been staked out there. My friend and I paid no real attention and continued to walk down our street, as her house is midway down the block and mine is at the far end. Then we noticed the low rumble isn't fading away like the guy is driving away, or rapidly increasing in volume like he's going to drive past us, but instead steadily staying at the same volume. I turned around first because I was raised to be super paranoid, and like I said, I frequent this sublet. This crappy truck is driving really slowly, maybe 20 feet behind us. I want to scream because, once again, super paranoid and suspicious of everything. But this has happened before and turned out to be nothing. So I give him a bit of the benefit of the doubt, and assume he could be looking at house numbers or something. After a second, I say screw the benefit of the doubt, as this guy is obviously staring at us through his tinted windows, and not at the houses. My friend notices I'm almost pissing myself, and asks what's up. To which I casually tell her that there might be someone following us. She flips out and whips her head around with no subtlety. It's really not her fault. I would have done the same had our positions been switched. And sees the car trailing us. At this point, it's pretty obvious we've seen him, so the guy speeds up a bit. So he's just a couple feet parallel from us. Then slows down again, so he's keeping pace, and rolls down his window. I get my first real look at him. Mid-30s, early 40s. Dark hair, weird stubble connected to his sideburns. Small, dark, beady eyes. Hey, you girls look like you could use a ride, he says, par creepy pedophile style. I'm literally shitting bricks at the moment, as this is exactly what happens in every LMM I've ever read, and I never expected it to happen to me, especially not in broad daylight. No thanks, my friend says casually, and we continue walking. The guy is keeping pace and leaning out of his window. No, really. Wouldn't want your pretty feet to get tired. My friend and I shoot each other a look, and I can tell she's panicking as badly as I am. And neither of us have a damn idea what to do. We can't lead this guy to our houses. We don't answer, and the guy continues, rambling on about how cute we both are, and how he's going down this road anyway, so he can take us wherever we need to go. My phone's in my bag, probably somewhere near the bottom, and most likely dead. And I wouldn't risk provoking this guy by reaching for it even if I could. We tell him again that no, we're okay, and to kindly fuck off. Nicer terms, of course. Not looking to get stabbed. He then thrusts his arm out the window, and I nearly have a heart attack thinking he's going to grab us. He shows us his ring finger, adorned with a gold band, and smiles. You know this ring isn't real, right? As if I give a flying fuck about if you're really married or not. He spends the next minute trying to convince us that he's not really married, and that he's a good guy who could treat us right. So basically he went from, hey, let me give you a lift, to, hey, I'd treat you real nice. My friend reaches her neighbor's house, and grabs my hand and pulls me into the backyard. He's retired Navy and pretty much told us that if we're ever in trouble, we should bring any creeps to his yard so he can beat the shit out of them. She bangs on his back door and he opens up within 5 seconds to ask us what the hell is going on. Then, seeing the terror on our faces, he lets us in, hears our story, and goes out with his semi-automatic pistol to the creep who's parked on the street in front of his house. He comes back in 2 minutes later and says he basically told the guy he's got about 2.5 seconds to get the fuck off his block before he blows his pig brains out, or something to that effect. The creep screeches an illegal U-turn in the one-way street and hauls ass out of there. Crappy car squealing like it's about to break down on him. He calls my older brother, who's the only person home at this point, to come pick me up and escorts my friend to her house. I haven't seen the truck creeper since, but it's a small town. I'm sure this isn't the last time I'll see his ugly face. Some notes. No, we didn't get a license plate. My friend and I were too stupid to think about it at the time, and my friend's neighbor's only concern was whether the guy would leave or if he'd have to use his gun. Also, my brother's been picking us up for the time being since that incident. He takes night classes and is usually home from the morning until about 7. But he's never picked me up before, because I never thought it was necessary to, being so close to the school. We did call the police and filed a report, and I gave a description, but with no license plate or other incidents reported, there's not much they can do. I was attending the university in a nice small town in California. I lived just a couple blocks away from campus. It was about a 10-minute walk, so I never bothered trying to find parking and just walked. I had a math class that ran from 6 to 9 at night, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I generally have no issues walking home, even in the dark. I'm 6'3", around 200 pounds. I have a big red beard, and I believe people are usually more afraid of me than I am of them. I should note that I'm a total pansy, and were anyone to ever attack me, I'd probably end up in the fetal position crying. About a week before this particular night, the school sent out an email to all students. There had been several instances of girls being stalked and, in a couple cases, attacked or taken by a group of 3 to 4 men in a black car. They warned us to walk in groups and not stay out late. The attacks were all after dark. I remember reading the email and feeling horrible for the girls who had been attacked. But I also didn't pay it much attention as I didn't quite fit in the attacker's criteria. While people had been able to count the number of assailants and describe the car, nobody ever got a license plate number. It was a very cold Thursday night. I'd worn my large hooded jacket to keep warm on the walk. We had a test that day, which meant we'd have to leave class early. Our teacher would usually spend about 20 minutes going over stuff, then give us the test. After we finished and turned it in, we were allowed to leave. So instead of all 30 or so people leaving class at once, we were all spread out in our departures. I was probably the 10th or so person to finish the test, and I started on my walk back home. I threw on my big jacket and put the hood up. I love this jacket because it's incredibly warm and makes me look more bear-like. One of the people who finished the test before me was this fairly petite girl. We had sat next to each other several times, but I'm pretty socially awkward and had never spoken to her. She was walking about 30 yards ahead of me, and it was around 8 p.m. and dark out. She was staring at her phone as she walked along. We'd been walking for a couple minutes when I started noticing something that made me feel a bit off. There weren't streetlights along this stretch of road, so it was pretty dark. I could have sworn I saw something moving in the street, but I wasn't sure. I began to pay closer attention, and after a few seconds, I realized there was a car moving slowly behind this girl. It was a black car, and they didn't have their lights on. It was almost impossible to see them. I immediately recall the email I received the previous week about the attacks. Small girl, alone at night, black car. Holy shit. I sped up to start catching up with her. The car pulled closer as well. I called out to the girl. She stopped and turned around to look at me. As she turned, the car doors opened. I grabbed my phone, turned on my flashlight app. 3 men jumped out of the car and started running at her. I started yelling at them, and she started running away from me. They were about to catch her, and I was sprinting at them. I'm 100% sure 3 dudes would absolutely kick my ass. I'm sure 1 dude would. I had no idea what was going to happen if I caught up to them in time. I started shouting everything I could think of at them. I deepened my voice to sound more intimidating. I puffed up my bear jacket to look as big as I could. I remember that nobody had been able to get the plate numbers, so I shined my light in the car. I started shouting out license plate info at them. This freaked out the attackers. 2 of them ran back to the car. 1 guy turned to me and looked like he was going to come at me, but one of the guys in the car told him not to. I was too big. They flipped their lights on and sped off. I reached out to the girl to make sure she was okay. I shined my light on her to make sure she hadn't been caught or anything by these men. She was crying and shaking. At this point, a couple other people had finished their tests and had seen the last of the encounter. Another guy from the class and I walked the girl to her dorm. She even made us walk her to her door on the 3rd floor, even though access to the building required a card. We called the police and told them about the encounter. I had memorized the plate number of the car, as I shouted to the guys a couple times. A month or so later, they found the car. Inside were some knives, duct tape, mace, and rope. They caught 2 of the guys outright and were trying to get them to out the others involved. Every Tuesday and Thursday, even after the police caught the guys, I would walk the girl to her dorm after class and then head home. It was one of the scariest moments of my life. I thought for a while that I was going to either watch this girl get kidnapped or be brutally murdered stopping it. Stupid, rapey, kidnappy meanie guys. Let's not meet. In my childhood neighborhood, my neighborhood's pool was larger than the other surrounding neighborhoods, so people often visited ours instead. When I was 8, I went to the pool with my sisters on one of the first days of summer, as I always did. When the lifeguards kicked all the kids out for adult swim, I sat down in the pool chair next to my sisters. This guy, between 11 and 13, laid down on the chair next to me and said, "You're beautiful, will you go out with me?" My sisters thought it was funny and teased me about it, so I just kind of laughed. But it made me uncomfortable. I was really shy back then, so I wrapped my body up in the towel I brought to cover my body, which he was staring at very openly. He introduced himself as Chris and kept trying to talk to me, and I was too shy to tell him to go away, so I let him keep the conversation going, even though it made me uncomfortable. I soon forget about it, until I went to the pool next time. There he was, telling me how pretty I was, petting my hair, asking me to go out with him, and introducing me to his disabled grandmother, who brought him to the pool. Anyway, one day this girl came up to me and asked me if Chris was bothering me. I lied and said I really didn't care, and she rolled her eyes and joked about how he used to ask her out too, and that she was glad he'd found someone else to pine over. The girl, Elizabeth, started hanging out with me when I went to the pool, which was almost every day since I was allowed to go by myself if I wanted. She explained that she and Chris were good friends from a different neighborhood, but came to our pool because it was bigger and had more room for his grandmother to work on her physical therapy for her legs. We became great friends and laughed about how Chris was always following us around and asking me out. One day I noticed that Chris followed me all the way back to my house and tried to hide behind a mailbox when I turned around. As funny as that sounds, I didn't think it was funny back then and rushed back into my house. I began to notice that he was getting more aggressive and annoyed with me for refusing to date him. He started asking me to go on walks with him through the park and brought his grandmother so I didn't feel like I could say no. He would take me into the woods or behind the jungle gym, out of sight from his grandmother, and make creepy comments about my body and touch my cheek while telling me how pretty I was. He'd pet my hair and try to bounce the curls, like stretching out a spring and watching it curl up again. His grandmother would offer to let me sit on her lap during these walks while she controlled her chair, which made me really uncomfortable because I didn't know her well, and being a stupid, ignorant 8-year-old, I thought her atrophied legs were a little gross. He continued to follow me home, even when I took a shortcut through the woods or the long way that led in circles. His presence began to make me nervous because I wasn't sure what would happen if I continued to turn him down. I started avoiding the pool when his grandmother's handicap van was there, but I'm pretty sure he just fixed that by showing up later than usual, so I'd already be there when he arrived. All of my friends, including Elizabeth, thought it was funny, so I never told them I didn't want to go to the pool anymore, and I never brought it up to my sisters or parents. So if someone asked me to go with them, I'd just go and hope he wasn't there. Finally, during the last week the pool was open, I went to the bathroom. The bathrooms are a bit off to the side of the pool and closed off with a large heavy metal door so kids don't sneak in and vandalize it at night. The second I entered, the door shut behind me and the lights turned off. Then I heard Chris say, "I'm not letting you out until you agree to go out with me." And he locked the door. The bathroom was cold and pitch black, and I was terrified of the dark at the time. The tile was that disgusting, slimy, wet feeling that tile gets when it's wet, with bits of dirt and sand on it, which is why I never liked going in there in the first place. It also smelled like chlorine and a typical subpar public restroom. Stuff of nightmares for an 8-year-old. I started banging on the door and screaming for help, but nobody could hear me because of the really heavy door and the location. But then some angry soccer mom started screaming at me to stop pranking her and how much trouble I was in. Turns out that she'd been locked in there too, and was mad that while she was peeing, the lights turned off. She called for help with her phone, and I was eventually let out of the bathroom. Being 8, I didn't think about it much, but I now realize how creepy the whole situation was. I should have told someone the first time he followed me home. And it never occurred to me to just stop going to the pool. The lifeguard stopped allowing people from other neighborhoods due to an unrelated series of break-ins. And I'd heard that he was banned from the pool for locking me and the mom in the bathroom. But the next summer, I saw a boy who looked just like Chris, but taller, and with blonde streaks dyed into his hair. Might have been his brother, or a spot-on look-alike. But I never went to the pool again after that. And I never met Chris, or Elizabeth, again. Up until 1st grade, I lived down a cul-de-sac. The road was shaped like a lollipop, and my best friend lived right where the stick meets the lolly, if you will. She was a couple years older than me, the youngest of 4, and was the only girl. Naturally, her older brothers taught me everything I know, years too soon. We would tag along with them as much as it would let us. One day we followed her youngest brother to the Blues store, down the main road our street was off of. It was not a very far walk, maybe about a quarter of a mile stretch. Being the early 90s, 3 kids under 10 walking a few blocks to the convenience store was not unheard of. I must have been about 5 or 6. Maddie was 8, and Joe 9 or 10. I remember he got Andy Capp's fries, like always, and we were about halfway to our street when we all whipped around to the sound of loud car engines behind us. Honestly, I think I was too young to fully process what was happening. Remembering it now feels very lucid, if that makes sense. Seconds after noticing the cars were coming up quick, and we were on the sidewalk, Joe screamed, "Run!" And the 3 of us booked it to our street, down the straight road and into their house. Here's the thing. All the cars were the same car. Nice sports cars. Sorry, I don't know cars. But I know they were new. And they were each a different color. One was red, one was black, and one was yellow. Same car, different colors. Shiny paint, and very much in unison. They revved their engines as they drove behind us, not coming up next to us or cutting us off like they could have. We were young. How fast could we really have been running? We got to the house, slammed the door behind us, and went to the front windows. We watched those 3 cars circle the block several times before driving away. I don't know why we ran. I just remember that feeling of panic. Joe must have felt the same feeling, having told us to run. We were followed, so the feeling was correct. Again, I don't think I could fully process it. I was just doing what I normally did, mimic my friend, who mimicked her brother. I do know, however, that Joe was scared, even after they left. I don't know who they were. I don't know why they would chase 3 kids. I also don't know why they didn't come back. Knowing what house we ran into. Maybe they were older kids who were trying to scare us. Obviously, let's not meet. I wouldn't even be writing this story here if I didn't think I saw them again. But I think I have seen them again. About a year ago now, Route 1 on Saugus, Mass. About an hour from my childhood town. I saw a situation going down with 4 vehicles. It was late at night, after midnight. My boyfriend and I were always taking long drives, but I can't remember the specific reason we were there that night. Anyways, we came out of a 7-Eleven and got in my car. We looked ahead and saw 3 trucks circling another random car. I should explain how Route 1 looks. Basically, it's one of those annoying roads that you never U-turn on. You know, it's 3 lanes across. You have to take the right and cross the street at a light in order to loop over and merge into the opposite direction. It's also lined with plazas, retailers, grocery stores, a mall, etc. on both sides. For the most part, the parking lots connect somehow at the back of the buildings, like where the 18-wheelers go to drop off stuff, so that you wouldn't have to get back on Route 1 to go over to a plaza or 2. Right, so we see this going down. I was right in front of one of those tiny buildings with a bank ATM, so they weren't hidden or far back off the road. Immediately, I was shocked to see what looked like a high school fight about to go down. 3 bully trucks on one random car. Let's call it a Corolla. I mean, they were all the same truck. 3 of the same truck in 3 different colors. 3 nice, souped-up, shiny painted trucks in unison. One was black, one red, and one yellow. They all had their big spotlights shining on the brownish Corolla from the rack bar. I had to look that up. But I couldn't hear anything if they were talking, and nobody got out of the car. After half a minute, the Corolla quickly reversed from them and sped away, towards the back of the 7-Eleven and around to an entrance to Route 1. Right away, all 3 trucks did the same thing at the same time. They all shut off their headlights and followed the car. My mouth was on the ground. Yes, it was the most exciting thing I'd seen all day. So yes, I followed them to see more. I just could not believe this was happening. It didn't make any sense. They called a lot of attention to themselves already, being that there were 3 huge trucks of the exact same make, model, and accessories. Then they all shut their headlights off and raced after the little car? How would they not be afraid to get tagged? There are a lot of cops on Route 1, and it was late. I only followed for a minute or 2 due to my boyfriend reminding me of how bad an idea it was to continue. Once they got on Route 1, they looped over to the other side. I saw them behind the plazas on the other side though, headlights off, following one another, clearly looking for the Corolla. I didn't call the cops because I really didn't know what was happening. What would I have said? I didn't even really think about all this until the other day when I was reading stories on Reddit. Then I remembered the 3 sports cars when I was young. All too much of a coincidence to me. I tried looking it up once to see if there was a group or something known for driving the same car in different colors, but as expected, I found nothing. I'm writing this to share my experience, but also because I'm genuinely curious. Does anyone have a similar experience? Maybe it's a stretch, but it is a strange coincidence. I know I don't want to meet those cars again.